They didn't even look at her when they said it. She has no right to speak. The sentence wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was delivered calmly, professionally, with the quiet authority of people who believed the matter was already settled. The kind of tone used when a decision had been made, long before the room was entered. The council chamber was cold, not in temperature but in spirit. Long oak tables formed a semicircle. Brass nameplates gleamed under harsh ceiling lights. 12 council members sat shoulder to shoulder, papers neatly stacked in front of them, pens aligned like weapons laid out before a battle that wouldn't require effort. At the far end of the room, alone in a single wooden chair, sat Eleanor Whitmore. She folded her hands in her lap the way she had learned to do decades ago, palms together, fingers interlaced, nails trimmed short. Her back was straight, not out of pride, but habit. A lifetime of correcting her posture had made slouching feel like disobedience. At 74, Eleanor had learned many things. One of them was how to remain still while being erased. The chair assigned to her was lower than the council's seats. Not by much, but enough. Enough that when she looked up she had to lift her chin slightly. Enough to remind her where she stood in the hierarchy of the room. Or rather, where they believed she stood. Councilman Harris cleared his throat. He didn't look at her either. His eyes stayed fixed on the document in front of him. "For the record," he said, "Mrs. Whitmore is present as an interested party only. She is not recognized as a stakeholder, nor does she hold voting or speaking privileges in this matter." A murmur of agreement passed along the table. Small nods, no objections. Eleanor felt it then, the familiar tightening in her chest. Not panic, not fear, something colder. She had known this moment would come. Not this exact room, not these exact faces, but this posture, this tone, this dismissal dressed up as procedure. "Do you understand?" Harris asked, finally glancing up. Eleanor met his eyes calmly. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady, clear, unshaking. That apparently irritated him. "As long as we're clear," he replied, already turning away. To them, Eleanor was a technicality, a formality, a woman whose relevance had expired along with her husband's heartbeat. What they did not see, what they could not see, was the weight of what she had already survived. The hearing concerned the Whitmore Foundation, founded 42 years earlier, registered as a civic development trust. Its name appeared on libraries, parks, educational grants, and public buildings across 3 counties. For decades, the foundation had been synonymous with generosity, scholarships for underprivileged students, emergency funding during floods, renovations of historic landmarks, community programs that filled the gaps left by government neglect. To the public, the foundation was a benevolent institution. To the council, it was an asset. And to Eleanor Whitmore, it was something far more personal. It had started as an idea at her kitchen table. She remembered the night vividly, the smell of burnt coffee, the rain tapping against the windows. Her husband, Arthur, hunched over a notebook, scribbling numbers with the intensity of a man who believed ideas could change the world. "People need help before it's a crisis," Eleanor had said then. Not after. Arthur had smiled, that crooked smile she fell in love with at 22. "Then let's build something that listens," he replied. They built it together. But the story the council told today was very different. Following the passing of Arthur Whitmore, Harris continued, the foundation entered a transitional phase. Given Mrs. Whitmore's age and lack of formal executive involvement in recent years, the council determined that continued oversight by her would not be practical. Practical, that word again. Eleanor stared at the grain of the wood on the table in front of her chair. She followed the lines with her eyes, grounding herself. She had learned long ago that when men spoke like this, interrupting only confirmed their assumptions. "She was never on the board," Councilwoman Drake added smoothly. "Her name appears nowhere in the current filings." "That is correct," Harris said. "Therefore, she has no standing to address the council regarding the foundation's future." They spoke about her as though she were a footnote, an appendix, something left over from an earlier edition. Eleanor's fingers tightened slightly. Arthur had insisted she stay off the board. "Let them underestimate you," he used to say. "It's safer that way." She hadn't argued then. She had trusted him. Now she wondered if he had known this day would come. The council's proposal was simple. They intended to restructure the foundation, transfer operational control to a newly appointed executive committee, one approved by the council, merge certain assets, reallocate funding, liquidate properties deemed non-essential. It was all very clean on paper. What they didn't say out loud was that the Foundation's real value wasn't in its mission. It was in its land, properties in prime locations, buildings whose worth had multiplied tenfold since the Foundation acquired them decades earlier, endowments quietly growing in the background, money waiting patiently, and Eleanor was standing in the way, or rather, she would have been if she had been allowed to speak. At the edge of the chamber, two legal aides whispered to each other. "Is she going to say anything?" one murmured. "She can't," the other replied. "Didn't you hear? She has no right." Eleanor heard them anyway. Her hearing wasn't what it used to be, but some sounds carried farther than others. She lifted her gaze again. This time she looked past Harris, past Drake, past the polished arrogance of the council. She looked at the seal on the wall behind them, the city emblem, the motto engraved beneath it, integrity, service, accountability. She almost smiled. Arthur's funeral had been 2 months earlier. The council members had attended, of course. Black suits, somber expressions, carefully chosen condolences. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Harris had said then, gripping her hand with both of his. "You must be very tired," Drake added softly. "Please take care of yourself." Eleanor had nodded, thanked them, accepted their sympathy. She had noticed even then how quickly their eyes moved past her, to the Foundation representatives, to the lawyers, to the quiet conversations that began before the casket was even lowered. Grief made people invisible, especially women, especially old ones. "Is there any objection?" Harris asked now, tapping his pen. Silence. "Then we'll proceed." He raised the gavel. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, not outwardly, not dramatically, just a small internal click, a decision. She did not stand. She did not interrupt. She waited. The gavel struck wood. Motion approved. Just like that, decades of work were reassigned, redirected, stripped from the woman who had watched it grow from nothing. To them, it was over. To Eleanor, it was only beginning. As the council members gathered their papers, a clerk approached Eleanor. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently. "This way, please." She rose slowly, leaning lightly on the chair for balance. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. If they expected her to shuffle out quietly, they would be disappointed. As she turned toward the exit, Councilwoman Drake glanced at her. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her tone suddenly warm, "I hope you understand this isn't personal." Eleanor stopped. She turned. For the first time, the room truly looked at her. Her eyes were calm, sharp, far too awake for someone they had already dismissed. "I understand perfectly," Eleanor replied. Drake smiled, relieved. "Good." Eleanor held her gaze a moment longer. "You should," she added softly, "because some things don't belong to the council." The smile faltered, but before Drake could respond, Eleanor walked away. Outside, the afternoon sun was blinding. Eleanor paused on the steps of the building, letting the warmth settle into her bones. Cars passed. People hurried by, unaware that a quiet war had just been declared inside those walls. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She did not check it immediately. She took a breath, then another. Only then did she reach inside, withdraw the phone, and look at the screen. One new message, from a number she hadn't seen in years. No greeting, no explanation, just 4 words. "It's time. M." Eleanor closed her eyes. Arthur had been right. Names mattered, and there was one name the council had forgotten to check. Eleanor Whitmore did not go home after leaving the council building. That, in itself, was unusual. For the last 2 months, her days had followed a predictable pattern. Breakfast alone, a walk around the garden, paperwork she pretended still mattered, afternoons spent reorganizing drawers that didn't need organizing, simply to give her hands something to do. Grief had a way of shrinking the world, but today something else filled her chest. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. She walked 3 blocks east, past the cafe Arthur used to love, past the old bookstore that still displayed first editions in the window, and stopped in front of a narrow brick building squeezed between a tailor and a closed-down law office. There was no sign on the door, just a brass plaque, dull with age. M. Sir Caldwell, attorney at law. Eleanor stood there for a long moment before knocking. Then she knocked twice, firmly, Inside, the office smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, heavy with binders and boxes. Not the sleek glass and steel aesthetic of corporate law firms, but something older, something built for longevity, not impressions. A man looked up from behind the desk. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, glasses perched low on his nose. His suit was impeccably pressed but unfashionably cut, the kind of man who hadn't needed to update his wardrobe because his reputation had never required it. When he saw Eleanor, he stood immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. She nodded. "Michael." No handshake, no pleasantries. They had passed that stage decades ago. "You got my message," she said. "I did," he replied. "I was wondering how long it would take." Eleanor sat down slowly in the chair across from him. "They've moved faster than I expected," she said. "They think I'm finished." Michael Caldwell's mouth curved slightly. That's usually when people make mistakes. Across town, the council chamber buzzed with quiet satisfaction. Councilman Harris poured himself a cup of coffee in the break room, humming softly. "That went smoother than expected," he said to Drake, who stood beside him scrolling through her phone. "She didn't even try to object," Drake replied. "Honestly, I almost felt bad." Harris scoffed. "Don't. These things are easier when people know their place." Drake hesitated. "Still, Arthur Whitmore wasn't stupid. You don't build something like that by accident." "Arthur's gone," Harris said flatly, "and she's old. We followed procedure." Drake nodded, but something unsettled her. Eleanor's face, not defeated, measured. Back in Michael Caldwell's office, Eleanor removed a thin folder from her bag and placed it on the desk. "I need to know exactly what they think they have," she said. Michael opened the folder, scanning the documents. "They're relying on the current filings," he said. "Board rosters, public records. They assume operational authority equals ownership." "And it doesn't," Eleanor replied. "No," he agreed. "It rarely does." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "They dismissed you entirely." "They always have." Michael smiled faintly. "Then they've made the same mistake twice." He stood and walked to one of the shelves, pulling out a heavy black binder. "Arthur prepared for this," he said. "He just didn't tell anyone." Eleanor's breath caught. "He trusted you," she said quietly. "He trusted you," Michael corrected. "I was just the lock." He opened the binder and laid it flat on the desk. Inside were documents, old ones, original ones, trust amendments, conditional clauses, contingency instructions written in precise legal language. Eleanor's name appeared again and again, not as a board member, as something else. Meanwhile, in a glass conference room on the other side of the city, the council's legal team reviewed the foundation's assets. "Everything's clean," one attorney said. "Transfer paperwork is ready." "Any exposure?" Harris asked. "Minimal. The widow has no legal authority to intervene." Drake frowned. "No legal authority that we know of." The attorney shrugged. "We checked the filings." Harris leaned back in his chair. "Then we're done here." At that exact moment, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. A missed call. Unknown number. He ignored it. Michael pointed to a paragraph in the binder. "Arthur created what's called a conditional authority structure," he explained. "The foundation could operate independently until a specific trigger event." Eleanor traced the words with her finger. "What trigger?" Michael looked at her. "His death." Silence filled the room. "They think the board controls the foundation," Michael continued. "In reality, the board was provisional, advisory. The true authority was dormant." "And now?" Eleanor asked. "Now," he said calmly. "It's awake." He turned the page. A single line stood out, bolded. "Primary executor upon trigger event. Eleanor Grace Whitmore." Eleanor closed her eyes. Arthur had known, not that he would die, but that they would come. Back at the council offices, a junior clerk entered Harris's office hesitantly. "Sir?" "Yes?" There's been a request." Harris sighed. "From who?" The clerk swallowed. "From Caldwell and Associates." Harris froze. "Caldwell?" "Yes, sir. They've requested an immediate review of the foundation's restructuring." Drake looked up sharply. "Michael Caldwell?" The clerk nodded. Harris's jaw tightened. "That firm hasn't been involved in city matters for years. They say they represent—" The clerk hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore." Silence. Drake felt a chill run down her spine. "That's not possible," Harris said. "She has no standing." The clerk shifted nervously. "They've attached documents." Harris snatched the file from his hands. He skimmed the first page, then the second, then stopped. His face drained of color. Eleanor sat quietly as Michael prepared copies. "They'll push back," he said. "They'll try to delay." "I don't need speed," Eleanor replied. "I need precision." Michael nodded. "You always did." She stood, smoothing her coat. "Michael," she said, "when this becomes public, they'll say I manipulated the system." He met her gaze. "They only say that when someone finally understands it." Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. Outside, the sun was setting. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt taller than the buildings around her. Back in the council chamber, Harris slammed the folder onto the table. "This changes things," Drake said quietly. Harris said nothing. He stared at the name printed at the bottom of the page. Executor Authority confirmed. For the first time that day, he felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. And somewhere in the city, a woman they had silenced was preparing to speak. Eleanor Whitmore did not announce her return. She let the city do it for her. By the next morning, 3 different offices had received the same packet. Not emails, not scans. Hard copies, properly indexed, certified. Delivered by courier, city legal, the Foundation's internal counsel, and, most importantly, the Office of Public Oversight. Each packet contained the same thing: confirmation of executor authority, dormant clauses activated, and a formal request for an immediate suspension of all unilateral board actions pending review. It was precise, quiet, and devastating. At 9:12 a.m., Councilman Harris's assistant knocked on his door. "Sir, we have a problem." Harris looked up slowly. "If this is about Caldwell, I already—" "It's not just Caldwell anymore." She placed a document on his desk. The heading alone made his stomach drop. Notice of Temporary Oversight Review, issued by the Office of Public Oversight. Drake arrived minutes later, coat still half on, hair pulled back too tightly. "They're freezing the transfer," she said. "At least until the hearing." Harris exhaled sharply. "She doesn't have the influence for this." Drake didn't answer. She was staring at the signature at the bottom of the page. Eleanor Grace Whitmore. Not shaky, not hesitant, steady. Across town, the Foundation's board gathered in emergency session. 12 people sat around the table. 12 people who, 24 hours earlier, had believed they were in control. Now, they spoke in low voices. "This is procedural overreach," one of them said. "We followed protocol." "The widow doesn't have operational experience." Drake stood at the head of the table, hands flat against the surface. "Stop calling her that," she snapped. Silence. "She has authority," Drake continued. "And if we underestimate her again, we won't survive the review." Harris entered late. Everyone turned. "She's pushing for a public hearing," he said. "Council chamber, open session." A murmur rippled through the room. Public meant records. Public meant press. Public meant loss of narrative control. "We can block it," someone suggested. Harris shook his head. "Not without looking guilty." Drake's jaw tightened. "Then we control the optics," she said. "We frame this as confusion. A misunderstanding. An elderly woman overwhelmed by grief." Harris nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "That worked before." Michael Caldwell watched the news footage without sound. Eleanor sat across from him, hands folded, eyes steady. "They're going to paint you as unstable," he said. "Sympathetic but unreliable." "They always do," Eleanor replied. Michael slid another folder toward her. "These are the internal communications we subpoenaed." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "They underestimated how many people still answer my calls." Inside the folder were transcripts, emails, meeting notes. Phrases jumped out immediately. "She won't fight back. She doesn't understand the structure. Let her think it's ceremonial." Eleanor read every word. She did not flinch. "They said this out loud," she murmured. Michael nodded. "And they put it in writing." She closed the folder gently. "Then let them say it again," she said. Michael looked at her carefully. "In public?" "Yes." The hearing was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. By Wednesday afternoon, the rumor mill was spinning. Some said the widow was suing the city. Others claimed the Foundation had been hiding assets. A local paper ran a cautious headline: "Dispute over Foundation authority heads to council hearing." Eleanor's name appeared only once. Drake noticed that. "She's not giving them anything," Drake muttered. Harris paced his office. "We need a character witness," he said. "Someone credible. Someone who can question her capacity." Drake hesitated. That could backfire. Harris stopped pacing. "Do you want to lose control?" Drake swallowed. "No." "Then find someone," Harris said. "Someone who knew Arthur. Someone who can say Eleanor wasn't involved." Drake nodded reluctantly. "I know someone." Thursday morning arrived cold and grey. The council chamber filled early. Press lined the walls. Cameras clicked softly. Observers murmured. Eleanor entered quietly through the side door. No entourage, no announcement. She wore a simple dark suit. No jewelry except a thin wedding band she had never removed. Michael walked beside her. Heads turned. Whispers followed. "That's her. She doesn't look confused. She looks calm." Eleanor took her seat at the long table reserved for speakers. She did not speak. She waited. Harris opened the session with practiced authority. "This hearing concerns a dispute regarding the Whitmore Foundation's governance structure," he began. "We will hear statements from both sides." Drake spoke first. She stood, shoulders squared, voice steady. "The council acted in good faith," she said. "Based on the information available at the time, Mrs. Whitmore was present, informed, and did not object." A few nods from the audience. Drake continued. "However, we acknowledge that grief can complicate memory and understanding. This hearing will clarify matters for everyone involved." Eleanor watched Drake without expression. Michael leaned closer and whispered, "She's laying groundwork." Eleanor nodded once. Drake called her witness. A man in his 50s took the stand. Former board advisor, longtime acquaintance of Arthur. He spoke confidently. "Arthur handled the business," he said. "Eleanor preferred to stay out of it." Drake nodded sympathetically. "And in your experience, was Mrs. Whitmore involved in strategic decisions?" The man hesitated. "Not directly." Drake turned slightly toward the council. "It appears," she said, "that while Mrs. Whitmore is respected, her role was not operational." Eleanor felt a ripple move through the room. Michael stood. "May I cross-examine?" Harris hesitated, then nodded. Michael approached the witness calmly. "You said Eleanor wasn't involved in strategic decisions," he said. "Is that correct?" "Yes." Michael opened a binder. "Do you recognize this document?" The witness squinted. "It looks like a trust amendment," Michael said. "Dated 8 years ago, signed by Arthur Whitmore." He flipped the page. "And this signature?" The witness's eyes widened slightly. "That's Eleanor's." Michael nodded. "She co-signed every major restructuring," he said. "Would you call that involvement?" The witness shifted uncomfortably. "Well, perhaps advisory." Michael didn't smile. "Thank you," he said. "No further questions." Drake's jaw tightened. Harris cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "you may speak if you wish." The room stilled. Eleanor stood slowly. This was the first time she had spoken in the chamber. She did not raise her voice. "I was advised not to," she said simply. A murmur passed through the audience. "But I will clarify one thing," she continued. She looked directly at Harris. "You assumed silence meant ignorance." She turned to Drake. "You assumed age meant absence." She turned back to the council. "You were wrong." She sat down. Michael stood immediately. "We request the introduction of additional evidence," he said. Harris frowned. At this stage, Michael held up a document. "Internal communications," he said, "from the Foundation Board." The clerk accepted the file. As copies were distributed, the atmosphere shifted. Drake read the first page. Her face drained of color. Harris scanned a paragraph. His fingers tightened around the paper. The words were unmistakable. Dismissive, calculated, damning. The press leaned forward, cameras adjusted. Eleanor remained still. Michael addressed the room. "These documents demonstrate a pattern," he said. "Not confusion, not misunderstanding, but deliberate exclusion." He paused. "And they were written before Mrs. Whitmore ever entered this room." The council chamber fell silent. Harris looked at Eleanor. For the first time, he did not see a widow. He saw a threat he should have recognized sooner. The clerk cleared her throat. "Mr. Chairman," she said quietly, "the Office of Public Oversight has requested a brief recess." Harris nodded stiffly. Recess granted. The gavel struck. Eleanor did not move. She watched Harris leave the chamber, shoulders tight, steps hurried. Michael leaned close. "They're panicking," he murmured. Eleanor's gaze remained forward. "Good," she said softly, because the next thing they would hear would not be whispers. It would be a name, and once spoken it would change everything. The recess lasted 12 minutes. In those 12 minutes, the council chamber transformed. Phones buzzed, journalists whispered. A producer from Channel 7 quietly stepped out to make a call. Someone from the oversight office took a seat in the front row. Eleanor Whitmore stayed where she was, hands folded, back straight, eyes forward. When the council members returned, the room fell silent. Councilman Harris did not look confident anymore. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and spoke slower than before. "Before we proceed," he said, "the Office of Public Oversight has requested to address the chamber." A woman stood from the front row, mid-40s, neutral suit, no emotion in her face. "My name is Rachel Monroe," she said, "Senior Compliance Director, Office of Public Oversight." The words alone shifted the balance of power. She continued, "Our office reviewed the documents submitted this morning. Based on preliminary findings, we are issuing an immediate suspension of all unilateral governance actions taken by the Council concerning the Whitmore Foundation." A collective inhale filled the room. Drake's hands tightened on the table. Harris blinked. "On what grounds?" "On grounds of procedural misconduct, conflict of interest, and deliberate suppression of a lawful executor," Monroe replied evenly. Cameras clicked. The press leaned in. Monroe turned slightly. "And now," she said, "we will hear from the executor herself." She looked directly at Eleanor. "Mrs. Whitmore." Eleanor stood. This time, there was no whispering, no mocking, no smiles. She took one step forward. "I was told I had no right to speak," she said calmly. Her voice carried. "So I waited." She turned slightly, addressing the chamber, the council, the press. "I waited while decisions were made about assets I helped build, while authority was reassigned without my consent, while my silence was mistaken for weakness." She paused. "And I waited because I knew something they did not." Harris shifted in his chair. Drake swallowed. Eleanor reached into her folder and removed a single document. "I am not only Arthur Whitmore's widow," she said. She lifted the paper. "I am the sole surviving trustee of the Whitmore Continuity Clause." A murmur rippled through the room. Michael stepped forward. "The Continuity Clause," he said, "activates upon verified death of the founder and supersedes all secondary governance structures." Monroe nodded. "It also grants full operational authority," she added, "to the named trustee." Eleanor did not raise her voice. "I signed it with Arthur 16 years ago," she said, "in this very city, with 3 witnesses present." She turned the document so the council could see. The seal was unmistakable, the date unmistakable, the signature unmistakable. Harris stared. "That clause was never disclosed," he said weakly. Eleanor met his eyes. "No," she replied. "It was ignored." Silence swallowed the chamber. Then Monroe spoke again. "For the record," she said, "Mrs. Whitmore is not only authorized to speak." She paused. "She is authorized to decide." Drake's composure shattered. "That's not possible," she said. "We reviewed the structure." "You reviewed what you were shown," Michael said sharply. "And you never asked who prepared it," Eleanor added. She turned toward Drake fully now. "You smiled when you said it was just paperwork." Drake said nothing. Monroe consulted her tablet. "Effective immediately," she said, "the Council's interim authority is revoked. The Foundation's accounts are frozen pending full audit. And this office is opening a formal investigation into abuse of office." Gasps echoed. Harris stood abruptly. "This is outrageous." "Sit down," Monroe said. He did. Eleanor looked at the council one last time. "You believed I was nobody now," she said. She did not sound angry. "You were wrong." The gavel struck. Session adjourned. The fallout was immediate. By nightfall, headlines filled every major outlet. Foundation governance suspended. Oversight investigation launched council authority. Revoked after documents surface, widow revealed as sole trustee in public hearing. Drake resigned the next morning. Harris was placed on administrative leave by noon. 3 additional council members were named in the inquiry within the week. Eleanor returned home quietly. No interviews, no statements. She let the truth do the talking. 6 months later, the foundation reopened under new leadership. Transparent. Audited, publicly accountable. Eleanor chaired the first meeting herself. Not from the head of the table, but from the center, where everyone could see her. The investigation concluded with formal reprimands, financial penalties, and permanent disqualification from public office for 2 officials. A policy reform was introduced citywide. No executor could be sidelined without judicial review. Eleanor stood at Arthur's grave one afternoon, hands folded. "They thought silence meant surrender," she murmured. "It never did." She turned away, walking forward, because power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits until the room is full, and everyone who underestimated it is listening. If this story moved you like the video, subscribe and share it with someone who believes silence means weakness.